and welcome back to the Boropolis podcast. I am joined, as always, by Nathan. And, well, we've hit the international break. The podcast is a little bit late. Just before we go into anything, I know a few people did mention last week about audio issues and the fact mine's a little bit higher than Nathan's. I can let you know there's some good and some bad news. I have ordered a mic, however, it's not arrived yet. So, really, because we're on episode 99, for the big 100th episode, we should have a lot better audio than we've had for the previous 99 episodes. I mean, something might be said about the fact that it's taken us 100 episodes to sort of try and get that fixed, but there is a couple more people mentioning it, so I just wanted to get that out of the way quickly. Also, because we're approaching that 100th episode, I never normally do it at the start of the podcast. However, if you aren't subscribed and you watch and listen on YouTube, please do like the video and subscribe to the channel, and on audio platforms. Also, please do rate and review. Right, now all the housekeeping's out the way, Nathan. We've had 2 games since the last podcast. As I say, we're in the international break now, so the podcast's a little bit later. We've had probably about 48 hours extra to digest everything which has happened over the past week. We're now a week on from Birmingham, which we'll obviously touch on, and of course, we've also seen the Blackburn results. I mean, before we get into the football, how's your last week been? Because for those that aren't aware, I mean, you've been on death's door, really, haven't you?
Yeah, I've had a shocker, if I'm honest. Over the last week or so, we recorded the last podcast 2 Sundays ago now, and on that day I'd got back from Dublin and have just picked up the worst illness ever. Um, so yeah, was literally bedbound all last week. As you can probably tell, there is still a little bit of a croak in my voice. So yeah, apologies for that. But yeah, did manage to pick myself up and was able to view both games from the comfort of my own home on the sofa, even for the Blackburn game, which was a little bit of a kicker because I thought I would be better for that one. But yeah, other than being horribly ill, I'm all right, Chris. I'm on the mend now. So yeah, what about yourself? How's your week been?
Yeah, I mean, do you know what? You went to Dublin really at the wrong time. And I know it's probably down to the prices because they're ridiculous for St. Paddy's Day. But I suppose if you'd have picked it up on St. Paddy's Day on a weekend that was filled full of Guinness, it wouldn't have been as bad, because you would have felt less guilty that you'd picked it up there. It's a little bit of a stinker, the fact that you've picked that up the week before St. Paddy's Day, because then I guess on actually the day of St. Paddy's Day, you probably were bedbound as well, so you wouldn't have even been able to go out and celebrate that, were you?
No, yeah, just absolutely battered to bits for a week, and I thought it'd last a couple of days, but it just got worse and worse. And yeah, I think I'm coming to the end of it now. But yeah, missed pretty much everything that happened last week, if I'm honest.
Well, I suppose the good thing is you're on the mend. And as you said, well, as you mentioned to me, rather, how's my week been? Yeah, it's been all right. I celebrated St. Paddy's Day with a fair few pints of Guinness. I wasn't in Dublin, but I still celebrated. So yeah, I guess to be fair, I don't think I actually have any sort of Irish heritage, but the name Cassidy, I mean, there's got to be somewhere along the line. So I'll just take that, and that's a good reason for me to have several pints of Guinness. But yeah, this isn't a Guinness podcast, although it would be an interesting one for sure. Football, Nathan, and in particular Middlesbrough Football Club. As I say, it's a week on from Birmingham now, so obviously for those that are listening and watching, you'll be fully aware of the results and the things which have unfolded since then. But just touching on Birmingham, it was a case of really, Nathan, at the time of recording last week, we just thought it was a case of go there, try and get the 3 points, get the job done. It might not be pretty. Birmingham are in an awful situation. And in the end, to be honest, apart from a great goal from Riley McGree and a pretty standout moment from Rav Vandenberg in terms of clearing up some mess, really, that Senny Dieng had caused, it was pretty uneventful, to be honest. And just a side note, I know that you spoke to a Birmingham podcast prior to the game. Birmingham looking absolute shambles, I must say.
Yeah, it's not great, is it? Discussing with Craig from the Tilton Talk Show. Yeah, they were very worried going into the game. It's sort of getting to that point of the season now where you don't want to be down there. Obviously, only a couple of weeks ago we were talking very similarly that we were going to be dragged into it. Thankfully, that hasn't happened, and we've pulled away now. But yeah, they look a really sort of it looks like a damning state of affairs down there at the moment. I'd sort of spoken on that show about Middlesbrough against Tony Mowbray sides, and obviously apart from this season, it's usually a sort of difficult game when we play up against his sides, and we usually get beat more often than not. But obviously he's not been in the dugout, so yeah, nice to go to St Andrews and just win the game with a moment of brilliance. Really great strike from McGree, one of those ones that you probably could have written it, being a former player there. And yeah, literally nothing else happened in the game. They didn't really offer anything at all. Can't remember them having a shot, if I'm honest. Obviously, you mentioned the cross that troubled Dieng, but Vandenberg was there to clear it up. But yeah, a clean sheet on the road, very nice. And yeah, it sent us into the top half of the table. I think we were ninth after that result, which was very nice. I'll always go back to post Stoke and the conversation that we had about us possibly being dragged in, and to win 3 games on the spin from there. Okay, possibly a little bit fortuitous the way that the pendulum of momentum has swung with that Saints red card all those weeks ago now. But still, you have to ride that wave. And yeah, we went 3 wins on the spin. And you have to credit the players and Michael Carrick and his coaching staff for that, to sort of face adversity, everyone sort of panicking from the outside, looking in, and just to sort of settle everything down with 3 wins in a week was very nice. And yeah, we're sort of at this point now where going into Saturday, the conversation was, oh well, if we win this game, then it puts us a couple of points off the playoffs again. And yeah, it's the sort of, it's just the way the league goes, I suppose. It's so tight between all sides, and it gives you that sort of false sense of optimism, I suppose, that you are good enough for the playoffs because you're only a couple of points outside of it, when realistically we're not good enough for the playoffs. And that was shown on Saturday at home.
Yeah, it was. And I guess, to be honest, one of the key moments from the Birmingham game resulted in one change for the Blackburn game. Obviously, Rav missed that. He hasn't gone away with the Netherlands, the youth team for the Netherlands. And it's basically to do with the fact that when he clears that ball and stops almost a certain goal, really, he takes a really sort of heavy load on top of him. I think the big Duke falls on top of him and onto his knee. So there's a little bit of a twist there as well. And yeah, that has ultimately meant that he's missed the Blackburn game. Hopefully, I mean, literally crossing everything that's not long term, because even for the remainder of the season, I don't think we're going to make the playoffs. As you say, I don't think we're good enough. But being able to watch Rav Vandenberg at the age he is, playing at centre half, whilst he's still a Middlesbrough player, is a joy. And I just, listen, I don't really think we will sell him in the summer, but at the moment, I think with a player of that calibre, and you can see it for his age, it's just about enjoying him whilst he's here, because he's going to go on to much bigger and better things. And I think we've all kind of accepted that now. So I hope the injury's not bad for that sake, just so I can get a few more games in and make sure that, yeah, I enjoy him whilst he's here, as I say. Obviously, in regards to the Blackburn game, there's 2 or 3 sort of really big talking points. The first one involves Marcus Force and the miss early on in the first half. Flicked on from a cross, and at the back post, Force is there and just the one person you'd want the ball to fall to, and he manages to put it wide or over. He just gets his connection all wrong. That was the real big chance of the first half. And obviously, we saw the change. We saw Rav come out and Isaiah Jones come into the team. And even still, the sort of the 5 at the back shape remained, but I guess not as sort of rigid and defensive minded as what we'd previously seen it. Because obviously, with Ayling as that right-sided centre half, it was more becoming a 4, and he was bombing on and doing what he likes to do best, really. So at times it looked like the 3 centre halves. At other times it really wasn't. Ayling was near enough just playing as a wing back and forgetting his duties as a right centre back. The next talking point is the fact that Marcus Forss goes off injured. And obviously I was at the match. At first I wasn't really sure sort of what had happened. I couldn't see his face because obviously he was facing to the other end of the stadium to where we would usually sit, Nathan. Upon you texting me, I was able to find out whilst I was at the game that, well, from your angle, being able to see sort of replays and things like that, he looked pretty distraught, which is really, really disappointing because, I mean, he's just starting to hit form, just starting to score goals again. He's had some rotten luck really now since the back end of last season with his injuries. And as I say, he's finally getting back to a point where he's scoring goals, playing alongside Latilaf, and they're developing a somewhat of a partnership, to be honest. And yeah, he has to come off. And ultimately, and there's obviously other moments in the game which play a big part, but I think that was the moment where the game was taken away from us. And I think Force going off, I said to you the other day, we love Johnny Howson and we always praise him on this podcast. And he's probably our most influential player and our most important player. But Marcus Force, in the system we've been playing, I think there's a case to be made where he's probably second, and if not second, third in regards to our most important player, because the role he plays alongside Latilaf is one that no other player, no other sort of forward that we have available to us at the moment is able to play. And we saw really the breakdown of our fluidity and our good start to the game, in fairness. We started well when Force went off, and that was down to really the fact that Finn has come on, and it almost felt like popping ourselves in a time machine because we went back a few weeks and it just looked like that jumbled up, sort of not very convincing, wishy-washy forward line where McGree's playing as the 10, Azaz is playing off the left, or they're rotating between those 2 positions. And there's no real sort of actual partner for Latilaf. It's just seemingly a bit of a wishy-washy mess with those 2 on the pitch. The question I'll ask and put to you, and what I personally thought what should have happened, is I'm not his biggest fan. I think his form has fallen off a cliff since Christmas, but in terms of a natural replacement for what we had available to us for when Force went off, surely Greenwood was the better option.
Yeah, possibly.
I mean, he's more sort of typically, I know that's not his out and out role, but in terms of a partner for Latilaf and more someone that's similar in attributes to Marcus Force, it's got to be Greenwood, surely that change.
Yeah, I think you could maybe make a case because he's played sort of even further forward than a number 10 um, in previous weeks when we didn't have like Elath. Um, I'll hark back to that Sunderland game when he played up front on his own. But yeah, it sort of just killed any momentum that we had, that change, unfortunately. And I don't even necessarily think it's Azaz's fault. I think he's been brought to the football club with the sort of vision that he's going to be playing in that number 10 position in the 4-2-3-1 that we usually played. And yes, we've had to sort of alter that of late because we were getting caught out time and time again because of our midfield. And obviously we've got lack of options there at this moment in time. With if you have one injury, then we'll be back to square one in terms of the same two having to play game in, game out, week after week. So yeah, we've had to change our system slightly, and at the minute, Azaz doesn't really suit that five at the back, and he doesn't fit into that forward line. So yeah, it did kill our momentum. There's no doubt about that. And yeah, I mean, I wouldn't necessarily say that Blackburn did a whole lot really in towards the end of that first half or even in the second half, but they certainly grew a little bit in confidence from the opening 20-25 minutes. And that was probably because our momentum was slowed because of that substitution. Yeah, I didn't think that they were the best side in the world. Again, a side low on confidence, a side that are in that pack of teams down the bottom of the division. And yeah, you'd hope that you'd be able to get the job done against them at home, create a good couple of chances. But again, after 20 minutes, we didn't create all too much, really. Obviously, we hit the bar very late in the game. But yeah, nothing really of any proper note testing Ainsley Pears in that second half or from 20 minutes onwards.
Yeah, and you mentioned it there. I spoke about sort of two or three key moments in the game. The final key moment in the game, Sammy Silvera's miss. We've got to talk about it, unfortunately. And unfortunately for Sammy Silvera, it just seems like throughout this season, there's been a list which has grown sort of month on month where we are chasing a game. He comes on the pitch and he has a big moment to score and he seemingly just fluffs his lines. And it's unfortunate. It is because it seems to be him which always gets the chance. And there's something to be said for the fact that, he's put himself in the right areas. But some of the misses have been pretty unforgivable, really. Again, it comes back off the bar. Greenwood sort of half throws himself at it and manages to get a chest to direct it towards Silvera. Not that I don't even think he's intending to sort of chest it in his direction, but anyway, it ends up in front of him. And to not even make connection with the ball is it's really poor. It really, really is. And you think back to the Millwall game, I think it was. Sorry, no, it was the Huddersfield game at home, early doors in the season. He had a big one at Coventry, and there was another game which escapes my mind at the moment, where again he has a huge chance and just blazes it and completely misses the goal. And it's, as I say, it's frustrating because you see Sammy Silvera, and a few podcasts ago, I think after the Leicester game, we'd said, out of all of the summer signings, he's probably been the one who's actually contributed, because you could say that Gilbert's been the one that struggled the most, but he hasn't really contributed anything, so it's hard to judge. But out of the ones which have, had a fair share of action, I guess, and minutes, Sammy Silvera seems to have, throughout the season, had little spells where he's had a moment, been rewarded with a start, not really managed to grasp the opportunity. Then he's on the bench for a few weeks, and then he'll get another chance. And as I say, a big chance falls to him and he misses it. And I think at the moment, as we said in that podcast a few weeks back, what I was referring to, when he starts games and in certain moments, there has been flashes of, well, that's a really good finish. You think to his Norwich finish, you think to his goal, even against Leicester. It's a convincing finish, and you think, right, well, he might kick on from here, and then he just hasn't really been able to. And I think there's a lot of areas in his general play where he struggled a little bit as well. And it just sort of makes me arrive at a sort of more generalised topic in regards to the whole squad. And to be honest, we've spoken about Blackburn now. It's done and dusted. We didn't get the win. We drew the game. Another clean sheet, which is a positive, I guess. But it's sort of been and gone now. But players like Sammy Silvera, players like Sam Greenwood, I'm now looking at things and thinking, where do their future lie next season? Because I think there's probably 3, 4, maybe even 5 players at the moment where I look at the squad and I just think, depending on where we view ourselves as a club and how we want to challenge next season, those players just shouldn't be near the squad. And yeah, as I say, it's more generalized conversation now because this podcast, we might as well use it to think about where this season's going to go from now. I think, as you say, if we were going to make a late charge for the playoffs, we had to beat Blackburn. We haven't been able to do that. So now it's just a case of finishing the season strong and looking ahead to next year. I mean, the likes of Greenwood, Silvera, Luke Thomas, there's a few others, Josh Coburn. Are they all players now, as far as you're concerned, where we've seen enough of them to the point where if we want to be challenging next season at the top end of the division, Michael Carrick is going to have to be pretty cutthroat and basically replace those players?
Yeah, I think the 4 that you've named there are certainly going to be viewed by a lot of the fan bases on the chopping block. If I'm honest, I'd include Dykesteel in that list as well. I think I've seen enough of him over the years to think that he's not a player that in a season where you're trying to push on and trying to go up, he can't necessarily perform at that top level. He's done it once over a period where he's been at the club for 4 or 5 seasons now, and he's had one good season, maybe half a good season, if I'm being completely sort of cutthroat. And yeah, you can nitpick at a few of those players and say that they're not necessarily fit and available either for long stretches. Dykesteel's out for half a season every single season. Josh Coburn, okay, very sort of harsh of me, but hasn't been available for long periods this season. And when he has been available, yes, we spoke about it. He'd done a job for 8 games, maybe in our sort of good run throughout October time. But I can't even remember the game now when we were speaking about him. But yeah, I don't think he's good enough to be even a backup centre forward. I think we'll be signing a proper number 9 in the summer, and Latte Lath will even be the backup. But yeah, in terms of the other lads, Thomas, lone player. So yeah, wasn't convinced on the signing anyway. Haven't seen anything from him to make me think that he'd be good enough for us next season or now. Greenwood shows in the odd flash that he can be a really good player, tries his hardest. Um, a player who, strangely enough, I don't think that you can actually pinpoint his best position, because he hasn't played in that number 10 role behind the striker pretty much at all.
When we signed him, it seemed like he was going to be the person that was. I mean, at that stage, Morgan Rogers was still sort of being played up front and as a left winger. So he hadn't even found his feet in that 10 role. At the time when we signed him, it seemed like he was going to be the natural number 10 that was going to take over from Crooksy. And that never really happened. He sort of got shoehorned into that left attacking midfield role because McGree got injured. So you've got a point there. I mean, we haven't really seen him in his preferred position all season, and still that seems to be the case.
Yeah. And look, we've spoken about it a couple of times as the season's gone on, and at times when we've been frustrated. But at the start of the season, sort of everyone in the fan base is sort of I'm not going to say expectations, but hopes and aspirations were that we'd find ourselves in the playoffs again. if you looked at the league table and the teams that were in the league, everyone sort of understood that it'd be a difficult task to sort of go for the automatic promotion places, looking at the state of the teams that had come down and the quality that they had in their squads. Now, to be going to the end of the summer transfer window and to be signing players like Sam Greenwood, who, yes, I know it's not necessarily something that's always the case, but you're signing players that can't get in to sides that are in your table that you're competing with because they've got better options in those areas. You're never going to be able to compete with them with their sort of, I know this is bad to say, but rejects. Yeah, so then we followed that up with January signing Erling and Thomas as well. Obviously, those were more stopgaps because of injuries in the squad. And yes, they were needed. There's no doubt about that. We've massively struggled. But yeah, I think on the whole, you'd say that our summer business last summer was relatively successful. I mean, you've already turned over 15 million quid for a player that was here for a couple of months, and his best performances were against Port Vale and Exeter. So fantastic bit of business there. You've got Vandenberg that looks like the second coming of Beckenbauer in the squad, which is really nice. Tied down to he's got 3 years left on his deal, 3.5 years left on his deal, something like that.
If he does
Um,
this summer, by the way, he has to have a new contract.
yeah.
I think
He,
it would be justified and completely fair, by the way. If it means that he'll stay for one more year, give him a bit more dosh.
yeah, and I think strangely enough, a lot of people just sort of going on to a more general topic about the squad going into next season. A lot of people, and rightly so, are concerned with, oh well, who are we going to lose in terms of our actual players that you'd say would be in our side for next season. And obviously you'd look to Rav Vandenberg and Hayden Hackney. They're our two prized assets. There's no doubt about that. So with Rav, yes, there's bound to be interest. That there has to be, but we hold all the cards, which is very nice. And the same goes with Hayden Hackney as well. Now it'll be very interesting for me to see what goes on with Hayden because I expected at the start of this season that we'd see another year from Hayden Hackney that was just building upon what he put together last season, which was he looked like one of the best midfielders in the league last season. And he's had two quite long injury layoffs now this season and still not back yet. So it'd be interesting to me to see if there actually are clubs that are coming in trying to sign him based on the fact that he's had quite an injury hit season this season.
Yeah,
And I think that is bound to be something that is sort of flagged up at the top level that, yeah, look, he's a top player, there's no doubt about that. But he's had his injury problems this year. So they'd probably like to see if that continues.
yeah. I think to be totally honest, although obviously we haven't had the benefit of him being available for the majority of the season, I mean, it's not just him that's had lengthy injuries. It's almost played into our favour a little bit because I think now the sort of calibre of clubs that would be wanting to sign Hayden Hackney are perhaps not the calibre of clubs that should be trying to sign Hayden Hackney, if that makes sense. And as you say, that's probably down to the injuries. And because of that, we're sort of in a position where does Hayden Hackney really want to go and sign for a Nottingham Forest or a Crystal Palace if Nottingham Forest stay up? In all honesty,
Being our division, I was about to say there.
yeah, if Forest stay up, that is. I know they've had the point, but no, does he really know? If he then has another great season next season and manages to stay injury free, will you then see top clubs, your Tottenhams, your Liverpools, Newcastle have been mentioned in the same breath as him? I mean, top club, I think that's a whole different debate. But those types of teams, if Hayden Hackney has another season, even at the same level as the one that he has last season, then top clubs are going to come and snap him up at next summer. So I think the decision is sort of being made for him. Listen, a top club might come in from him and think, well, we've seen enough of him now where we can try and manage his injuries and hope that that's not going to be a continuing pattern throughout the remainder of his career. But I would say top clubs, if they're spending what will inevitably be quite a big fee, they probably want to see just that extra little bit more, just for him to prove his fitness levels, just for him to prove his consistency, which we know he can do. So yeah, as you say, it's fairly sort of, I don't want to get too ahead of myself, but exciting, because I feel like now we're arriving at a stage in the process, quote unquote, where as long as Carrick signs his new deal, and I mean, that's important in itself, you need that done and dusted, because there's still been nothing. I know there's sort of the little snippets to say that there's promising signs and he doesn't want to go anywhere. But yeah, that needs to be done, signed, sealed, and delivered, because he is the right man to take us forward. But in the summer, if you can keep hold of the likes of Rav, the likes of Hackney, even someone like a Riley McGree, and even if he did go, I think he'd be a lot easier. Well, I don't think, I know he'd be a lot easier to replace than a Rav or a Hackney. But we've now sold Rodgers in January, which was a little bit of a shock. Akpom, Spence, even going back to the Tavernier money. There's been a continuation of sales where we're sort of reached at a point where now we need to retain our assets and build a team and make some. Even this morning, Carrick's made a few comments as if to say, well, I kind of know the basis of my squad now. We just need to supplement that with some real sort of star quality, I guess, and some real first team standard players. That stage is where we're at now. So it's just a case of, look, we're talking very much ahead of ourselves. We've still got a couple of games to go this season. But in regards to sort of the wider conversation about players going, players staying, who we want to bring in, I think it's just important that we've arrived at the moment now where it really is a case of Steve Gibson, the recruitment team, Michael Carrick, go out and basically show the supporters for these extravagant prices. We're at a stage now where we're not hiding from the fact that next season we're going to have a real go.
Yeah, and I think this is it now. You always look at the the old cliche of trust the process, but you've had Carrick come in and he had to sort of deal with the cards that he was dealt with in the first season. It just so happened that the cards were fucking kings, queens, and aces, but Wilder couldn't get a tune out of them. So Carrick did that, put them into a system that worked. It really did work for a long spell. And yeah, okay, possibly a little bit of naivety, injuries as well. And yeah, it didn't sort of go the way that we all hoped it would in the fairy tale of, oh, well, he was only been a manager for a couple of months and he just dragged Middlesbrough back to the Premier League. This season, the job that we've had on our hands was a big one in terms of replacing a lot of older players out the door, a lot of loan players out the door, and the loan players were a massive, massive sort of job to replace because of what they brought in terms of end product. Really, there wasn't just sort of one player out of those loan players that was contributing at the top end of the pitch. There was a good few in Giles, Ramsey, Archer. and then obviously at the back with Stefan as well. We've had the season where it has been as we sort of thought it was from probably October, November time, that this season was going to be signing a lot of young players that are trying to buy into this project, that they know it's going to take a couple of years to sort of fully get going, but sign players from abroad in some cases with Rav and Silvera and a couple of others, and get them acclimatized to the environment, acclimatized to the way of playing. And yes, okay, there's been a good couple of bumps in the road in terms of injuries and other unforeseen circumstances that have been a little bit of bullshit that sent us off track. But look, we have found ourselves in a position now with, what is it, 8 or 9 games to go, where we're not going anywhere. We're going to be in the championship next season. We're not in danger of going down, and we're certainly not going up. It's all about just building and hopefully going into next season with a bit of momentum behind us. And yeah, it feels like the third year there has to be something that comes at the end of it. And to do that, you have to go out and show ambition. And as mentioned, supplement this squad that has evidently been devoid of it at points this season. Supplement it with some real quality that you perhaps had last year. If you can get someone in the mold of a Cameron Archer that is likely fit for 35, 40 games of a 46 game season, that will you can sort of hang your hat on for a goal or a moment of magic, then you'll be on your way, and you'll certainly be on your way at the top six. And the nice thing that I'm looking at as well, and this will have been discussed and sort of been included in the thought process, is, as mentioned, you looked at this season and the teams that had come down and the quality that they had. The boys that are coming down from the Premier League have just been in this division.
Just in regards to, obviously, we've gone off on a little bit of a tangent about the sort of wider expectations and things for next season. Obviously, this season still has a fair few games to go ahead, and we've still got some games over the Easter period coming up, that lovely little period where you get a few days off work and there's just football matches at random times. It's sort of like a B-Tech Christmas, isn't it, really? Southampton and Sheffield Wednesday. Southampton away on the Friday. Sheffield Wednesday, dear God. Sheffield Wednesday at home on the Monday. What are your expectations for those? I mean, expectations, not necessarily predictions, but what are we hoping to see from that? I guess sort of in the midst of that, as well as an additional piece of news, it looks and sounds as though we may well have some additional people back available to us. Dale Fry, Josh Coburn, Hayden Hackney, and Bangura all progressing well, I think was the phrase that's been used. But I mean, throughout this season, that's been said about numerous injuries, and it never really sort of tends to mean anything at all. So if they're back, fantastic. If not, it's not the end of the world. But yeah, Southampton, you're going not for the football, really. And then obviously Sheffield Wednesday. I mean, how do we approach those two games?
Well, I'll give you my hopes and then I'll give you my expectations. So my hope is that, as discussed last week, we become the bastards of the championship. This is my honest hope. Southampton, as you sort of messaged me last night about, are quite a long way off now, surprisingly as well. And I know they've got a game in hand or two on Ipswich and the sides above them. But it'd make me really, really happy if we could just go there and just sneak a 1-0, just for nastiness sake, if I'm honest. It was obviously at this time last year that the shit of the championship decided that they'd turn into world beaters and ruin our chances of getting automatic promotion. So I just want to be horrible from now on. So go there, and if I'm honest, I know this might come back to bite me on the arse, but it honestly wouldn't surprise me if we threw in another Leicester performance.
It seems like this season, and it's getting to the point where we're stating the obvious because of how much we've struggled against the lesser sides in the division. But we seem to just be a better team when we come up against teams that are willing to basically leave big gaps in behind, come and have a go. If we can slot into that back five again, back three, whatever you want to call it, Latilaf's pacing behind. Hopefully, Force's injury isn't a serious one. It seems like again, don't want to speak too soon, like you said. It seems like the perfect opportunity for us to go make it difficult, try and hit them on the break, and be awkward. And at the moment, that's what's getting the best out of us.
Yeah, so that's my hope, but sort of also expecting a game similar to Leicester. I think that we're going to go there and sort of play the same way that we did at the King Power, and yeah, it'd be nice to see. I'm sort of I've always been a little bit of a I don't know, maybe a little bit snobby about the way that Russell Martin plays his football. I suppose it goes back to Swansea where we play his sides. They'd have 90% possession, we'd still beat them just because they just pass the ball for the sake of it, really. But obviously with Southampton, he's got better players to do that. And with that added quality, it results in more goals. That's just how it works. So yeah, it'll be a difficult test. And then obviously Sheffield on the Monday. Now, listening and sort of watching everything that has to do with the championship, Danny Roll, since he's come in, has give them a fighting chance of staying up. And they're well in that pack now, despite them being in the bottom three still. But they played Leeds and Ipswich in their last two games, got beat 2-0 at home to Leeds and got beat 6 at Ipswich on Saturday. Now I listened to his post-match interview that he'd given to ITV, and he said, "Yeah, we've got 9 winnable games now from now till the end of the season." Now, again, nothing would please me more than for them to rock up to us on Easter Monday and for us to hit them for 6 as well. Now, the likelihood of that happening is pretty much zero. But yeah, I'd like to beat them as well, if I'm honest, just because I remember El Crapico in September and what they did to Lucas Engel in that first half. We need a
Oh,
redemption arc.
yeah, we do. I mean, crikey Moses. You said earlier, and you really emphasised the sort of severe bumps in the road we've had this year. There has been, despite it not being a horrendous season by sort of, really, really bad standards, there's been some god awful moments, haven't there? And yeah, I think it's just a case of, as we say, getting these games over and done with, trying to end the season with a bit of positivity. And even when you think back to, for example, the year before that we go to Wembley with Aitor Karanga, we finished the season prior to that with a very different looking Middlesbrough side to the one which started the following season. But it finished it building confidence, winning games, and getting results ready to take into the next season. And we started the following season fairly well. So, yes, okay, it's not always going to be the same. But if you can get a little bit of momentum towards the back end of the season, hopefully you don't then start the following season by pretty much losing about 8 games on the bounce. And that would give us a little bit more of a fighting chance than it has this season. So that would be a positive. But yeah, I mean, as I say, Nathan, we've sort of gone over things in a bit more of a general manner just because it's the international break, relaxed a bit, talked over a few topics. Just another topic before we end on Chris Jones, brought in as almost Kieran Scott's sort of right-hand man, head scout, has been credited very much so for the signings of Morgan Rogers and Rav van den Berg. There's been a little bit of a jig around in the sort of recruitment / scouting department. He has been promoted and is now head of recruitment. I mean, obviously, we don't get to see the ins and outs of how that's going to impact things, but it is interesting to see that, I guess, now we're approaching the end days of, gone of the days of Neil Bowser being the head of recruitment and top negotiator. Is it now a sort of Batman and Robin duo of Kieran Scott and Chris Jones tackling the transfer market instead of Neil Bowser?
Look, I think that, yeah, we've seen Chris Jones on Twitter over the last year or so. He'll usually quote tweet when we make a signing and sort of give a few words on how long the deal's taken and what a good deal it's been to get over the line. And in a lot of cases, it has been the case with those signings, especially players like Rav. So yeah, head of recruitment, it is a slightly different role if you just sort of take into what scouting is and what recruitment is. So yeah, we'll have to see what the summer brings, but we might have to get Michael Manning on the graphic trail for a dynamic duo of Batman and Robin if we decide to pull in, or manage to pull in, I should say, a big 30 goal a season striker that fires us straight at the Premier League.
Yeah, I mean, now we really are talking in hypotheticals because we're middles. That just doesn't happen. But yeah, Nathan, I think that's us done for this week. As I say, it's been sort of more general, I guess, this week. We've gone past the Birmingham and Blackburn games relatively quickly. But we're at the stage now where I think even for the remainder of the podcast, we'll obviously discuss certain moments in games and how things are looking and individual players. But it's now a case of, I guess, looking ahead and just trying to end the season with as much positivity as possible. Just to wrap up, obviously, next podcast will be our 100th. It seems ridiculous that we've actually got to that stage. We'll speak more about it in the 100th episode, but as I say, new mic on its way. So if you've got to the end of this podcast and you think, for God's sake, please can they sort the audio out, I promise you next episode it will be better. I say better just because I'll probably have the mic on a wrong setting and somehow manage to make it worse. But yeah, I'm just sort of pre-warning everyone. And yeah, we might even try and put together some sort of giveaway for the fact that we've managed to get to 100 episodes. But yeah, you'll have to wait and see with that one, see what we can pull out as a little bit of a thank you for those that have continued to support and listen throughout. But yeah, Nathan, I think that's time for us to sign off. So I will say thank you very much for your time, as you've been on the mend and on death's door for a while now. But you've battled through and managed to get it an hour or 55 minutes of the podcast done. So thank you for your time. Thank you for those of you who've watched and listened. As I said at the top of the show, please do like and subscribe on YouTube and rate and review on audio platforms. And that has been another episode of the Boropolis podcast. And we will hopefully see you around the Easter period when you've got plenty of Easter eggs to eat whilst you're listening to another episode of the Boropolis podcast.